My name is Michael Compton. I'm a member here at Christ Church and one of the many, many volunteers who assist in worship and in our ministries on campus and throughout the region and throughout the world, really. We're going to be looking at John's gospel today, although I'd love to have preached on Isaiah or Paul's Philippians excerpt, but we're going to be looking at John's gospel today. Start by imagining, if you would please, a dinner party that you've been to, a good one. Good dinner party you've been to. Now imagine what it would have been like to have been invited to that dinner party in Bethany all those years ago. In a moment, the room is going to be filled with sweet perfume, but not yet. Before that, though, there's going to be some food, some fellowship, probably some laughter, maybe some music. Of course, there's going to be some exchanging of what's new in the world, and of course, some telling of stories. If I were at this dinner party, I would try to get a seat next to Lazarus. This guy just got raised from the dead. What kind of stories is he going to be able to tell us? We'll never know, right? John doesn't tell us, and there's a reason why John doesn't tell us. It's because hearing about Lazarus' experiences is not the point of this gospel story. And despite what some people might tell you, John's point in this story is also not to teach us some lesson about economic policy. But some people do look at this story, especially that last verse, to get some idea about economic policy. At the end of this reading, Jesus says, "You'll always have the poor among you." Now, our English translations can't show it. They usually don't try to show it. But the "you" there is plural. Jesus is no longer just talking to Judas. He's talking to, as we say down in my hometown, all y'all, okay? All y'all will always have the poor among you. Now, some people wonder what that means. What does Jesus mean when he says to us, "You will always have the poor among you"? Because he's not just talking to the people at the dinner party that night, he's talking to us here today. What does that mean? Some people think Jesus means, don't bother trying. They think that they should just shrug and say, "Oh, well, what can we do?" Jesus has said, we're always going to have the poor with us. I guess we can't change that. So these people are going to choose the path of inactivity. Other people are going to choose a path of activity, but in the wrong direction. Because they're going to hear Jesus say that the poor will always be with us, and they're going to conclude that, well, since Jesus says we're always going to have the poor among us, and he's Jesus, we now have a holy mandate to do everything we can to make sure that's always true. That's not what Jesus is saying. Both of these choices are not good. So let's be clear. Jesus does think we should help those in need. And helping the poor is something that Jesus' disciples then and now should be used to doing. When Jesus says, "You will always have the poor with you," the disciples understood, I'm sure, what many study Bibles will point out in the notes today. That when Jesus says, "The poor will always be with you," he's alluding to the first half of Deuteronomy 15, verse 11, which says, "Poor persons will never disappear from the earth." Sounds pretty much like what Jesus is saying. When Jesus drops that phrase, "The poor will always be with you," he's alluding to the first half of Deuteronomy 15:11. But we need to also go back and look at the second half of 15:11. Because the rest of it says this, "That's why I'm giving you this command. You must open your hand generously to your fellow Israelites, to the needy among you, and to the poor who live with you in your land." The needs are many, and they're not going away. So do what you can to help. One way that today we're going to hear about an opportunity to help is to give some money to support the mission at Shalom Farms, and you're going to hear more about that in just a few minutes. Now, this whole question about the poor comes up because of Judas's question, right? Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? And it seems like a fair question, unless you're actually reading what John is telling us. John tells us it's really not a fair question because Judas is not being sincere. Judas, John tells us, doesn't really care at all about the poor. And even if John didn't tell us that, Judas still has the same problem that I have. Maybe some of you have it too. Sometimes I spend more time and energy worrying about what someone else is doing or not doing instead of worrying about what I am doing or not doing. Judas doesn't worry about what could I have done to help the poor. Why didn't this person do this thing to help the poor, is what he says. Remember what Jesus says about noticing the speck in your brother or sister's eye, but not seeing the log that's in your own eye? That's what's going on here. Like all of us, Judas is being a blind lumberjack who can't see the log in his own eye. Judas's hypocrisy is even worse because he tries to sound reasonable about it all by stating facts. This perfume was worth a year's wages. Well, maybe. But to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, Judas knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So what is the value of this perfume that Mary has poured out on Jesus' feet? What is the value of what Mary has done? What's amazing to me is that John tells us nothing at all about where Mary gets this perfume or why she brings it out now. We know nothing of the backstory. We don't know anything about Mary's motivation. The focus is entirely on the moment itself. Mary brings the perfume. She anoints Jesus' feet and then wipes his feet dry with her hair. And then, John tells us, the house was filled with the aroma of the perfume. Not when she first brings it out, but after she's finished pouring it out on Jesus' feet and wiping it with her hair. The house was filled with the aroma of her perfume. I don't want to get caught up in counting the words in this story, but if you look in your bulletin, you can probably tell this is in the center. It's the heart of the story. The house was filled with the aroma of her perfume. This feels to me like a holy moment. Does it strike you that way? I think something holy is happening when John says the house was filled with the aroma of her perfume. I wonder if John wants us to remember that vision that Isaiah had when he said, I saw the Lord upon the throne. His train filled the temple, and the house was filled with smoke. A holy moment. It reminds me of the Pentecost moment in the second chapter of Acts when the apostles are gathered together after the resurrection in one room. And Luke tells us that the sound of a mighty wind rushed in and filled the room where they were sitting. Smoke and sound and now smell. The aroma of the perfume fills the house. I think it's a signal to pay attention. This is a holy moment. Sometimes the best response to a holy moment is confession. That's what Isaiah did. Woe upon me, I'm a man of unclean lips, and here am I in the presence of the Lord. Sometimes the right response to a holy moment is confession. That's what we do here in our worship, maybe especially during Lent, but come here after Lent. We do it all the time. Sometimes the best response to a holy moment is proclamation. That's what the apostles did at Pentecost, and that's what we also do in worship all the time, through song, through prayer, through the creeds, and I would also say through the passing of the peace. And sometimes, perhaps the best response to a holy moment is silence. That's what's happening here. Did you notice? Mary doesn't say a word in the entire story. Jesus doesn't say a single word to Mary about what she has done. There's a moment of silence. Until, of course, Judas breaks this silence with his hypocrisy and his complaint about what should have been done with this money. But now Jesus does speak for the first time. He does not confront Judas's hypocrisy. That's a sign of mercy. He doesn't reveal to the room that Judas is a thief or that Judas is about to betray him. That's a sign of grace. Jesus simply says this, "Leave her alone. This perfume was to be used in preparation for my burial, and this is how she has used it." That's how the translation that's in our bulletin puts it. And it's a fair translation of one version of John's text. But this is one of those times where all those Greek manuscripts don't say all the same thing. Another version of John's Greek, one that's preserved in some of our earliest copies of John's Gospel, has Jesus speaking one sentence, not two. Instead of saying, "Leave her alone, period. This perfume was to be used in preparation for my burial, and this is how she has used it," Jesus says this, "Let her keep this perfume for the day of my burial." Now, that seems strange, right? Let her keep this until the day of my burial. She's just poured out this entire amount of perfume on Jesus' feet. How in the world could Jesus be saying, "Let her keep it"? But we already know how. Look again what Mary does. She pours out the perfume on Jesus' feet. And then what does she do? She wipes it off his feet with her hair. And now, some of that perfume, some of that aroma is on Mary. And when Mary leaves that dinner party that night, she'll have part of that aroma with her to remind her of that holy moment with Jesus. She'll have that with her as she goes throughout the rest of the week. Some of you might have grown up using incense in worship. This is a little bit like what that could be. Because worship is a little bit like that dinner party. We have some food, some fellowship, some laughter, some music. We try not to talk too much about what's going on in the news. But this is more than a dinner party. We gather together not just to hear some stories, and not just to be reminded that we're all just blind lumberjacks wandering around. When we leave this house, we will carry with us the aroma of this holy moment. And like Mary, that could remind us of what it was like to be in God's presence when we're distracted by everything out there. But we'll also be reminded what it was like to draw strength from the presence of Jesus, being invited to share a meal with him. That will give us strength, we pray, as we go out into the world this week. So we will carry with us the aroma of this holy moment. It's the aroma of real pain, of real suffering, of real mortality and death. But it is also the aroma of new life for you and for me and for all of creation. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Thanks be to God. Amen.